Oh no! They don't get it. It's okay. We get it.
I was like, yes, Lord, come on with the cancellations.
Ooh, we going in it. Now just kidding.
I don't know if you know this, but I'm black. Am I good?
He's with the best of them, and he's one of my favorite men to emphasize.
that entrance sounds like much more than who I actually am.
My guest of honor has her fingers on the pulse of the theater arts world. She's a Columbia University Playwriting Dean's Fellow, Eugene O'Neill National Playwrights Conference finalist, and she was named by Playbill.com and Black Theater Coalition as a next generation of Black theater Black professional honoree. She's a brilliant award-winning playwright director, a trained screenwriter, and songwriter. She currently serves as an assistant professor at Texas Christian University, where she's leaving her imprint on the next generation of creative theater artists. She believes in the power of educating and empowering others. She's passionate about social change, and it's reflected in her work. My guest of honor understands that art imitates life, so she makes her pen speak. She uses the stage to evoke emotion and influence change. So it's safe to say that she's dedicated to producing excellence on and off the stage. Today, my guest of honor is Ayvaunn Penn. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Katrina?
I'm doing great.
Very good. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you for coming. So
Absolutely.
I'm sure that a lot of people are going to be able to see themselves in you. And hopefully it'll inspire them to take the path that you took.
Hopefully. It is not easy, but it is doable.
It's not. So I want to start from the beginning. Like, I want them to be able to trace your footsteps in the sand. So tell me a little bit about your background and where you're from.
Ooh, that's that big, broad question where if you say that to a storyteller, you could be here forever. But I'll try to keep it brief. Right. So a little bit about my background. I am a theater artist today, but I was a late bloomer to theater. So when I first began my formal theater journey, many people do plays in elementary school, middle school, maybe even high school, maybe at church. But really seriously looking at it was my senior year of college. There was a production that had an open casting call for anyone on campus. I thought it would be fun, so I hopped out there and gave it a go. I was fortunate to be a part of the production. And to my surprise and delight, one of the professors who was working on the next production was inquiring if I'd be willing to audition for the next show, was interested in working with me. My schedule did not allow for that, but he did sit down and talk with me about career options and opportunities in theater and the performing arts in general. So I always remember Professor Kirk Everest for how he invested in me and took time out of his schedule that he did not have to. I was not one of his formal students, so he took extra time that he didn't have to take to talk with me, do audition coaching with me, and just tell me really kind of the next steps that were possible if I wanted to pursue a career in the theater arts. So that's a touch of my background in a nutshell.
That's amazing that somebody really took the time to invest in you. So does that kind of impact the way that you handle other people now?
It most certainly does. So not only Dr. Everest, but I remember one of my other professors, Dr. Roger Platitsky, who was a creative writing professor. And that was where I found my wings in terms of, today I'm most primarily known as a playwright and director in that order. But I always was a strong writer. I did competitive speaking and could write an essay like that, but I didn't really delve into creative writing until being in his class. And sometimes, as it happens in undergrad, you just need to adjust your schedule. And that's how that happened. I needed to drop a class and get something else that would fit to move me towards graduation. And intro to creative writing is what I took. Now, it wasn't a playwriting class, but it's where I finally found my voice in terms of being a creative writer. So with all of that being said, and to answer your question, yes, as a professor, I take very seriously my job, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, to just have very real conversations with students about what they are considering pursuing, being a resource, writing letters of recommendation, all of those things, because without people who did that for me, I wouldn't be where I am today.
Yeah. I love the fact that you said that you were a very strong writer. That's where it came from. Like everything kind of sparked from that space. So where did that come from? Is that something that's passed down in the family? Or is it something that it just came up in you?
Well, I do come from a family of educators. My mom would speak in church and, write, welcomes and so forth and so on. A family of preachers as well. So I guess you could say that does pass down to me. Now, none of them are playwrights or creative writers, but just communicating with others and having a thing for communing with others is what got passed down to me.
Yeah. It's amazing, though, how the smallest little things that our family go through or the things that they used to do kind of trickles down in us and it magnifies as it goes down to the next generation. So I bet they're very proud of you and excited to see how it's grown in you, too.
They are. I'm going to tell it. Some elders didn't necessarily believe in my ability to be a writer, which was disheartening. I would say it's a generational kind of thing. I think some people today, especially young people today, don't realize how close we are to what's in history books. The fact that my parents went through integration and what was considered feasible careers for Black people back in the day was a fairly narrow list. They believed in, you can be a teacher, which is good and perfectly respectable. But in terms of things like, oh, you're going to write shows, or you think you're going to write a book or be a poet or something like that, in the words of this particular elder, who is going to certify you to do that? Like, she just couldn't even fathom that it was possible. And she's no longer alive today, but if she were alive, she would see, look, your progeny has done the thing.
Yeah. Look, so whenever you did hear those words, how did you overcome that or push forward after you heard those words?
I would say it was a little hurtful, but I got it given just the time frame and time period in which she lived and grew up. It was not cool that it happened in front of one of my friends. My mom said, I will never let her talk to you like that ever again. And I don't say anything, when it comes to the elders, you're sometimes not quite sure how to deal with or handle them. But it was motivational. There were other people who didn't believe in me as I was pursuing theater. Famously, parents freak out when their children tell them they want to pursue the arts. And with our theater students, we have those conversations every day. But the constant reminder is it is possible, it's doable. People are working in our industry, so we know it can be done. It's a matter of knowing what it takes, having multiple skill sets, being a fully rounded human being who knows how to function in many different ways and avenues. So I generally knew, as far as that family member is concerned, I generally knew what it would take just from other people around me. And I was able to move on from there.
Well, I'm glad you had a great belief in yourself and you were able to at least have empathy with that family member, because that's love in itself too, being able to identify where they're coming from and still not being able to, well, not taking it to heart on your end, even though it stung a little bit. You
It
know?
did sting a little bit.
Yeah.
But especially given that person's trajectory, I won't say too much so she's not identified, but she broke some records herself as a Black woman. And it's just, what if you had listened to all the people who told you that no one in your area or region had done that before? It wasn't heard of a Black person, much less a Black woman doing those things.
Yeah.
Like, well, then you wouldn't have achieved what you achieved. But anyhow, on to happier things.
Yeah, that's all right. We're here now.
Yes.
We're here now. So tell me a little bit about your transition from your hometown to going all the way to Columbia University. Like, tell me about that transition.
It's funny you ask that because in my interview, my admissions interview, they said, and how will you as a Texan fare in New York City?
Man.
They're like, before we admit you, are you going to be okay? So a really great thing happened. My first professional theater gig was in Chicago a few months before I was admitted to Columbia. So Chicago was a really great baby step as far as a commuter city. It's not as big and intimidating as New York City might be, but you still have the vibe of taking the bus, taking the train, cabs, and all of that thing. Grocery shopping being a little interesting. Chicago has more cars and people driving, but the transition was interesting. My very first field trip was with Pulitzer Prize winner Lynn Nottage. She was one of my professors, and I forget the name of the class, but we went on various field trips with her around New York City, and then we had to write works or pieces inspired by that. And our first field trip was Coney Island. And I had never ridden the train before, so none of my classmates, I was asking around, is anyone else going, from my direction to want to ride with me or something? No one lived in the area. I lived by campus. I was very fortunate as the dean's fellow to have housing. I was waitlisted, and thank God they found me housing because I don't know what I would have done if I had to figure out how to find an apartment out there. But anyhow, got on the one train, rode it to the end. That was my first dipping my toe in the water of what it is to get on the train. And you really do have to fight off. You learn that New Yorkers aren't rude. It's just life. No one has time. You can say excuse me if you want. I still tried to be polite. I couldn't stand just the pushing and the shoving with nothing to go with it. So I would still say excuse me as the Southerner inside of me.
The Southern.
Fun random fact, yet related. I was in the grocery store and someone reached across me in the produce section and said excuse me, and I thanked her for saying excuse me.
In New York.
I did. It's like, oh my gosh, someone said excuse me, thank you. But it is a transition. I was talking with a student the other day who admitted that the city felt a little intimidating and they weren't sure if they wanted to go. There's many people who decide they're going to give it a try and have to go back home to wherever it is they came from. So I thank God for being with me. You have to be vigilant. It's a different vibe. It's a vibe. It's the heartbeat of American theater. Like Hollywood is the heartbeat of American TV film. Things film elsewhere, but Hollywood is what you think of. So it is that, and for those reasons, really cool. But to live, it's an adjustment.
She's like, not to live.
And you have artists who feel that way. Dominique Morisseau, who her show Skeleton Crew was on Broadway 2 years ago now. That was a really good year for her. And the show she's currently working on is the name is not the Soul Train musical, but it's the Soul Train musical, and they're trying to take it to Broadway right now. But I worked on one of her shows before her show, Paradise Blue, was the last show I worked on before leaving New York. And she does not stay there. She is bi-coastal. She will fly in for her work. She has an apartment in the city, and then she leaves.
That's not her thing.
So I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Well, I'm glad that God blessed you with a space and a place next to campus, so you didn't have to really be out that much. Only for the main things that you need to be out for. But as you went through that program, what would you say was the hardest part about going through that program?
Trying to figure out what I'm going to tell.
Which level? Which one?
I will start with this. Finding my voice as a writer. So when I applied to this program, I had come out of the master's theater program at Louisiana Tech University, where I was an acting and writing emphasis. And my journey with playwriting had been very short. That said, I learned what I needed to learn and wrote the pieces that got me admitted to Columbia. But it was still short. And I was coming at it from the direction of poet. So one of my professors at Louisiana Tech did an independent study with me, especially designed for my interests of contemporary poetic drama. So all of these different playwrights over the years who had written plays in verse. So I enter the Columbia program, and this is my shtick, this is my thing, but it wasn't always understood, which I didn't always get, because you have your Ntozake Shanges, For Colored Girls had a revival recently on Broadway, and it's a choreo poem that doesn't necessarily have, it does not have a traditional plot structure. It is poems strung together and set to dance. But nonetheless, I had some professors say to me, well, what this is not a play, or I don't understand the story we're telling right now, or this or this or that. And I actually walked away from my shtick for a little bit. And I said, maybe that's not the way to be successful as a playwright. I need to figure out what else I do well as a playwright. And I felt lost for a little bit and frankly upset. I remember calling or texting. That's the cool thing. I highly recommend Columbia University because some programs do not have faculty that allow you such accessibility to them. And if you're going to pay, despite being a Dean's Fellow, I still had a portion to pay. And that was the highest award you could get financially and in terms of honor, but there was still a decent chunk of money to pay. And if you're going to pay that much, you need to be somewhere where professors are easily accessible. So shout out to Columbia and David Henry Wong for, I texted or called him and I said something like, I just feel broken. Like I was having one of those student freak out moments. And he goes, well, I'm on the set of The Affair, a TV show he was writing for at the time, but I'll call you when we go to break. And he took time to soothe me and calm me down and all these things. But my peers and he was always very encouraging of me. Let me just say that. He was always extremely supportive. And he just said, yes, you can write with that writing voice. That is you. Like you can do it. It can be done. You will find your balance and your footing, all those things. And it clicked for everyone when I decided to direct my own work. I also found in class, in a playwriting class, you bring in works, you bring in pages, and then your classmates read the parts for you, and you read and you discuss with the professor, all the different professors you have. And I had to learn, just because I know the rhythm in my head, it doesn't mean other people are going to pick that up. So I learned to read my work myself, even if it meant I read it all, read it myself so it's read as intended. And then two, when I remember when I decided to direct my own work, because then directors that were assigned to me weren't on the poetic drama vibe either. Like they were perfectly fine, perfectly good. Many of them were doing great things now. Okay. But my writing is a very specific style, as are many poetic dramas. And I remember one of my classmates saying, but have you ever, I remember his old face, have you ever directed before? No.
Oh my God. No.
However, when my classmates and faculty saw that production, I remember one came up to me and said, anything I told you that didn't work or that you can't or shouldn't be doing, I am sorry. Because now I get it. You basically, you need to handle your work until further notice, because in your hands, it makes sense and it's cool and it's different and it's a unique voice that isn't out there.
Yeah.
So I would say that was the hardest part. And that moment, if there was a little lesson in there, I would say, don't be afraid to take charge of what's yours. There were plenty of people who were fine being assigned a director. That's all they can do when you come in. They don't know you. They don't know your work. Not really. They've read your admissions work, but otherwise they don't really know you. And for traditional work, that can be fine. But if something isn't working, don't be afraid to respectfully just go, you know what? Thank you, but I think I need to take it from here. I know we typically let everyone else read the work in class, but is it okay if I just read it, so I make sure it's heard the way it's intended? And don't be afraid. I remember, I'm a praying woman. I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. And I remember for my thesis show, I was like, God, I do not want to direct this. I do not. Thesis year is crazy. I just don't. And I tried to find persons, and the Lord left me out there by myself, like, you about to do this. Mm-hmm. And frankly, that's probably was the best thing. And probably is, a part of today. I never thought I would direct opera. But this year I have. I'm directing my second one. And
That's amazing.
It's funny, or in the words of one of my theatery people from back in the day, God wastes nothing. Like all those little things along the way, or maybe that you didn't intend to pursue, he comes back and uses it. And so here I am.
He definitely doesn't waste anything. And I love the fact that that whole situation just caused you to identify what your identity was, and to really challenge you to I guess stand on business when it comes to your identity, and make sure that you do the things that you have to do when it comes to being who you are, wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to your writing, do you have a specific process in which where you get into the mode of writing, or do you have do you have to have certain things to get into your writing mode?
I do. So this will sound very cliche, but inspiration. But every writer knows eventually you have to get over that. Because if anyone ever hires you into a writer's room, you cannot go, I missed the deadline because I didn't have inspiration. So when I am inspired, I write very quickly. And I write in spurts. So I guess what I'm about to say is less the things I need in as much as what my writing process is. Some people are the type, they go, oh, I wake up every morning at 8 a.m. Or if they have to get to work at 8, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I write 10 pages, and over the course of a year, I have a new play, and I can't do that. So what do I need? I have to immerse myself in the world. Once I have the inspiration, once I have the spark, once I have the creative wave, I have got to write it. So I really kind of shut the rest of life down. Now, as a professor, you can't do that in the school year. So I tend to do a lot of, as most professors do, their research and creative activity in the summer. And like the play I'm best known for Bo, about the Botham Jean case in DFW, I wrote that pretty fast, like the first draft. It first came out as about a 10-minute play, then a one act, and then it was eventually developed into a full length. But that first draft, the first roughly hour-long edition or one act form of it, I wrote in about 2 to 3 weeks. And that's while I was adjunct. And so I had time on my hands. So I would come home from work and go lock up and write. If it's a summertime, I still probably tend to write things pretty quickly in about a month. And I'm shutting off the world. I'm really not going and doing anything else. When I wake up in the morning, I'm telling people, don't talk to me. I love you, but don't talk to me. My brain has the creative juices flowing and I need to keep them. I just kind of move through and grab sustenance and water and then get to my computer and go. I find that if I do too much in the name of break, my brain leaves the world that I'm creating, and then I have to reacquaint myself. And no one really wants to go through that. Go back and reread these first 30 pages or something. No. I mean, it happens sometimes, but that's kind of my process.
Yeah. It sounds like it takes a lot of discipline and self-control, because a lot of people have dreams and they want to do certain things, but they're not always willing to do what they need to do to get it done. So I'm glad that you were able to talk about, shutting off the world and having enough willpower to do that, because that's what it takes sometimes.
For Bo was my first lesson. Like when you come out of grad school as a creative, everyone imagines, landing the dream gig or whatever. Everyone imagines that. But then you come to realize what I tell my students, and that is you have to be shining when no one's looking. You can't wait for the spotlight to come on to hit it. You have to be found doing what you do. And that means once you leave school and there's no longer assignments and you're a creative and no one's knocked on your door yet, it's like then you look around at what your peers are doing. They say, don't do that. I think it can be a little healthy not to be jealous, but to see your peers and what they're doing and be motivated. And it was self. If you want to have new and exciting news, you're going to have to write your first piece out of school. Now, you don't know what's going to happen with it. No, that's the thing that people have to understand about being an artist. You never know if anyone's going to like what you did, but you have to create from your convictions, and your audience will find you. That is a truth that every artist will tell you. But I remember writing that piece. I was inspired. I was moved. I was disturbed by the Botham Jean case, or learning from the family. It's pronounced Botham Jean. I was disturbed by it. And a part of how I process things, even me just growing up as a poet, that's how I dealt with emotions. And so really it was just as much for me as also, on our campus and student body and the community. That was a really hot button case. It had people divided and split. And I saw theater as a way to put all the feelings on the table and allow people to actually hear each other rather than talk at each other. I'm slightly digressing, but that was my motivation. So even when I wrote that piece, it wasn't self, what's going to be your next big thing? It came from a very sincere place of, I think my craft can actually help people have a conversation about this. And it has resonated. It has resonated. But I remember that moment of going before that, and really times after that, no one's going to come tell you to go make something else. You have to have the gumption to do it.
Yeah, if you're a creative, you have to create.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way around it. Even if it's something that you have doubts about, like, you can continue to work through it, but you have to create. There's no way around it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, really quick, I just want to ask you, how do you define success?
That's a good question. I would say what I have learned as a theater artist is success is living by your convictions. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. In entertainment, some people would say success is when you land the big thing. And that's a trap. Mm-hmm. Because, and I was having a conversation with a student about this the other day. We have a whole country and a whole world of that is bigger than New York, Chicago, and LA, with arts ecosystems in communities that need art near them. Not everyone has money to fly to these places to go see big shows. And everyone deserves some art. Art is life, right? Art is what makes us human. And don't get me on my soapbox about people who say, if you need to cut something, cut the arts. I say,
I'm going to ask that question.
I say, and so when you get off work, do you go binge watch something? That furniture you're sitting on, do you enjoy the design of it? Your house, do you think it's cute? All of these things, those have some science wrapped up in it. And a lot of art has science wrapped up in it too. My students know this when we discussed scansion the other day, but that's beside the point. The science of language. But all of these things that you don't think about, the touch of an artist was there. But alas, I digress. What does it mean to be successful, living by your convictions? I had a big aha moment in my theater history class as I worked on my last degree. And I was one of those people who thought, oh, bright lights, big city, that's the dream. And then as we're studying various artists, I began to realize, oh, this one, that one, they either wanted nothing to do with Broadway or never made it to Broadway, but they did their thing. They did their thing. They did it well. They did it independent of people going, oh my gosh, it's different from everything else. It must be weird or something's wrong with it. And I came to understand that those who were making history were not those who were chasing Broadway and lights. They were the ones who did something against the status quo, who were not afraid to be themselves. And that is often what you find with artists. The ones who tend to make it a lot of the time, sometimes this isn't the case. Some people will argue you down over this. But generally speaking, people gravitate toward the thing and the people that's different from what's already out there.
Yeah.
So for myself, I count myself successful being able to make a living, doing what I enjoy, and teaching it to other people, to the next generation, and being in an environment where I have moral support and financial support, people who believe in my work, and thank you, Jesus, throw some money behind it to help it go, because art can't go by itself.
Yeah.
And I am blessed. When I am tired, I had a big, long social media post not long ago that I'm not saying this because it had a bunch of likes. It was well received, but I think it just really resonated with people. Whenever I feel tired or a little beat up by life and all the different things, I remind myself that busy is blessed. That as an artist, if you're not busy, that means nobody wants you, nobody's thinking about you, and nobody wants to play with you. And as an artist, you're relying on all of those things. You're creating for, and yes, yourself, but if you want to be viable, other people have to like it, right? I remind myself that there was a day that my phone didn't ring, that nobody knew who I was, nobody knew what I could do. And so when I wake up, even recently, on my non-teaching day, and I'm waking up or the night before when I'm preparing my director's notes or whatnot, anytime I was like, man, I'm tired. I told myself, self, you are getting paid to go in a room and play. You make these notes, you wake up and you thank God that you get to do that, because not everyone gets to do that. It really is a privilege that not everyone gets. And that for me is successful.
I love that because it's bigger than you, and it forces you to have gratitude for what you have and what's to come as well. One of the main things you said is staying true to your conviction, and I think that's one of the best things you could have said, because a lot of people go against what they're feeling because they see what everyone else is doing, and that makes me think about like our calling and how God calls us to different things and how He wants us to be obedient to His word. And no matter what, you're either going to be obedient willingly or, it's going to eventually happen either way. But I want to know, like, how much of your faith is ingrained in how you operate in life on a daily? Because that sounds like to me exactly like us being obedient to Christ, going the way that He asked us to go. So how much of your faith is ingrained in your daily life?
Oh, my faith is ingrained in a lot. I would say, I don't consult God when I choose what I'm eating for breakfast. Perhaps I should, but for major decisions, even this path that I'm on, I remember story time. I know that what I am doing today, God would have me do for these reasons. I believe the Lord guided me to Louisiana Tech University. I'm not afraid to share a moment of failure, right? Because everyone needs to hear that and how people overcome that. So I told y'all I was the late bloomer to theater, right? Some people have been doing jazz squares and whatever since they was 3 years old or something. That was not me. No, I wasn't like little baby ballet, but that's not what we're talking about. I was not some theater nut from infancy. Or voice lessons and all of this since I could breathe my first breath or something. So a part of what Dr. Everest told me about was what's called the ERTA auditions. And those are auditions for universities and theater companies in the northern region. And then you have a conference called SETC for schools of the southern region and theater companies, so forth, so on. So I had my little training, my little dreams. It was keeping it real, a tough financial time for me and my family. And so it took money to get up there and go. It was a sacrifice for me to go. And I made it past the first round of auditions, and praise the Lord. I'm like, oh, thank God I don't suck. But after that, I didn't get any callbacks, and I cried and I cried, and I was bawling. And one of my friends who lived in the city brought me some Garrett's popcorn. The auditions were in Chicago, and I couldn't even get myself together to go down and say hello and retrieve my popcorn, so he had to leave it at the front desk. And I cried all the way home, and my mom came in. I was in her room crying, like in the floor bawling. She said, "Oh no, do I need to take you to counseling?" because because I had, this was the new thing I was pursuing, or so forth and so on. And really, God was directing me where I needed to go. And my mom said, "Well, have you considered Louisiana Tech? Maybe they have a theater program." That's where my dad went to school, and she went to school as well. Now, meanwhile, my first thought was like, Louisiana. My family's from Louisiana. Spent a lot of time going back and forth to Louisiana. I did not want to go. But meanwhile, I just wanted a place to get to continue refining my craft and going on this journey that I wanted to go on. And I was admitted. And that was, again, as I told you earlier, that was really probably the best place for me. As someone who was not a born theater nut, there was the graciousness there. I was able to play catch up. There was that graciousness and patience, and I got what I needed.
Yeah.
Even down to the point, I'll say this, my theater history textbook totally came back around when I was asked to teach theater history. I was like, oh my gosh, I have my textbook. I kept it. That money is coming back, that investment. But I was devastated when I didn't get callbacks of that, but the Lord knew what I needed and allowed me to do it in a faster time. I was like, oh, I'll do an MFA in acting and an MFA in playwriting. That was about to be 6 years of my life. Thank God the Lord stopped me and sent me somewhere else to, do the MA in 2 years and then be there to do the work that would prepare me for what would be my terminal degree. So ultimately, and I believe this as well, if I don't know if Columbia goes to the ERDAs, but I was a part of the incoming class with David Henry Wong, who has been such a great mentor for me. And so the timing was everything. God's timing is everything. If I had gone off elsewhere, right, I wouldn't have been at Tech. I wouldn't have had the experiences there that made me decide I wanted to do a degree in playwriting, which, by the way, was rooted in being a Black woman in opportunity. That's a story for a different day, but I just realized if I want to see a difference in opportunities for people who look like me, being an actor wasn't going to cut it. I'm just out there swimming with everybody else going, why aren't there more opportunities? I have to be a part of creating them. And so creating work that helps alleviate the problem. When it came time that I was applying for my terminal degree, I told God, okay, Lord, make it clear where you want me to go. And it doesn't get any more clear. I applied, I think, to 5 schools and I got rejection 1, rejection 2, rejection 3. And I was going, oh Lord. Then I got yes. Praise Jesus. And then rejection 5. It's like, okay, God, 1 yes. That's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
So when I am talking to people who are accepting of a conversation regarding faith, that has been the biggest comfort to know that whenever the going got rough or tough, that I'm not going to run because I know I'm exactly where God intended for me to be. And that same story applies to where I teach now. I won't go into that story, but I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that I'm literally where God intended or intends for me to be. So faith is a part of all the things.
Yeah. So I love the fact that faith is ingrained in everything because God is everything. Mm-hmm. And he definitely directs our steps. And whenever we allow him to lead us, we don't have to press, we don't have to pull, we don't have to do anything. There's a certain ease that comes with being obedient and understanding that whatever he's asking you to do is for your good, regardless of what it looks like. So I'm so glad that you have that story and that testimony where it's like, I can see his hand on my life in all these places.
Yes.
Can you explain to me how you feel when you're in the atmosphere preparing to direct something that you created or being around some of the artists in theater?
When I am preparing to direct something, what is that feeling? Great anticipation. If it's something I've written, a feeling of gratitude, because in the words of one of my playwriting classmates, she said, I don't know that I can write another play into the void. AKA, I don't know that I can write, that I have the emotional, mental capacity to write something else that just may not go anywhere. Yeah. So if it's about to be directed, thank you, Jesus. That means it's about to do a thing. It's about to be born. Mm-hmm. Now, I had to really decide for myself. When I started directing, it was really directing my own work and things I knew intimately. And so it's been in recent years in directing in the city, or even before that, I would ask myself, now, do I really enjoy directing just in general or just directing my work? And the Lord blessed me with these opportunities for people to ask me. And I said, I will use this time to figure out, do I enjoy it? And I find that I do generally enjoy storytelling and crafting and being on the other side of the fence. Very often when young people think about theater or entertainment, they kind of gravitate toward, I want to be a star. I want to be on camera and those things. And that's frankly where I started. Didn't know any better. But for the reasons I shared with you of creating opportunity and being a decision maker, you get to help make differences that you want to see. I would say as a Black woman in a directing space, one thing I think about is I shouldn't have to, but proving. So I shared with you about working on a Dominique Morisseau show, and that what was cool about that behind the scenes was she was sewing into the Black women working on that project. I was a directing observer. There were other young Black women in other production roles, and she took us aside and we chatted and had snacks, and she would talk with us, and here she is now, a Broadway playwright. But she started out, she had to direct her work, and she would talk about how people would challenge her about her own work when she was in the directing space, and she would notice the difference between how she was treated as a director, as a Black woman, versus a white woman, and then of course white man, where they have the freedom to explore, say, well, let's try this and see how that goes, and so forth, so on. But when a woman / Black woman operates or attempts to operate in the same capacity, rather than people trusting you, you find that often you're in this constant state of proving, which can get to be extremely tiresome when it's like, no matter how many degrees I have at this point, no matter how many Tony Award winning directors I've worked with, Tony Award winning actors I've worked with, Tony Award winning theaters I have been employed in, directing can, to a certain extent, be collaborative, but it can get tiresome to feel like, here I am having to explain myself when I really shouldn't have to, or the vision being questioned. And so why are we doing X, Y, and Z? When you're hired to direct, you can decide. But today, I've been trusted with this. I've been hired for my vision, for what I bring to this. I don't tell you how to do, aside from generally, yes, as a director, I tell you where to go. But in terms of if there is a special skill you're bringing to this process, such as singing, I don't tell you how to do that because that's not my lane. Let's have the mutual roads of respect that go every which direction. and go from there. But I guess a big word I would say would be gratitude. You asked me one. There's like three.
I know that's okay. You can say all three.
Proving gratitude, tired.
which is definitely art imitating life.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you understand representation and you've been in a space where you've been poured into, and now you're in a space where you get to do that with students. So, can you tell me what it's like making sure that you equip these young people with the tools that they need to be prepared for what they're going to see on the other side?
I feel, one, very grateful to be able to do so because, as I mentioned before, I think about the people who sewed into me. What do I think about when I'm preparing them? I think about wanting them to be fully whole and rounded people, right? It's really easy to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and no one's trying to rain on that parade, right? But there are certain realities to understand. I remember when I was first auditioning for grad schools, and all I knew was, I want to be a star. Because that's all I was young. I don't know. It's like, I want to act. Like, what do you mean, why? I just want to do it. But I remember my acting coach, who I just talked with today, one of my acting coaches, actually, saying, they're going to ask you your philosophy and why you want to do what you do. And as a mature adult on the other side, you understand why, because there are so many fish swimming upstream, and bluntly, not everyone's going to make it. And the ones that do are going to be the ones who persevere. And so if you don't know why you are doing what you are doing, you'll be by the wayside and someone else will take your place. As I mentioned before, and what I emphasize to students is whenever, as a primarily playwright rooted individual, I teach a class called Diverse Voices. And so as we talk about each playwright, I often talk about their journey, like we're doing right now, their journey, their story, what brought them to where they are. And often it's rough. They didn't wake up one day and were famous. It's sobering as an alum. They release the newsletter of saying what people are doing, and you go through and you look and see, oh, is anyone I know doing something exciting? And while I was a student in school, it would be sobering to see their graduating year and the year of whatever the successful thing is, because often it was a few years in between. So what I feel when talking with students is, I want you to be motivated. I want you to be excited about the journey that you're about to take. But I don't give out rose-colored glasses. I don't.
You should.
It is not. What would be discouraging is for me to just tell you, oh, you just go out there and you just do. I would have done you a great disservice. You need to know the stories of Issa Rae. Mm-hmm. She's the perfect example of you need to shine when no one's looking. When nobody's hiring you, go make your own YouTube miniseries and do it well and follow your convictions. And it arose just out of her own narrative and what story she felt needed to be told, but doing it so well that it developed a following, and HBO walks up to her and says, you're doing well over here on YouTube. Let's see about transferring this over here. Those are the kinds of stories I tell my students, or like Ayad Akhtar. His time came when he was 40. And it wouldn't be, people love to talk about Hamilton. A lot of those actors, the main actors, they aren't spring chicks. Now you know that black don't crack. So they look fresh-faced. But you start reading bios and you understand, oh no, they've been pushing for a while to get here. So it's telling students, the person who perseveres wins. You just don't leave the race. The person who perseveres wins. You keep yourself sharp. You're always applying. You're always going. You're always doing. Opportunity is not going to just come find you. You have to go and get it. And know why you're doing what you do, and you never know when your time will come. And never hinge your success on if you've made it to Broadway, because before anything goes to Broadway wants to know it's been proven anyway outside of Broadway. So that's the first thing, which means you had to be shining while no one was looking. You had to be doing work elsewhere, because Broadway likes the sure dollar. They like to know it was successful over there.
Yeah, obscurity is a real thing. And it can be used very well if you take ownership of it. Definitely. Okay, so my last question will be this: if money was no object and the sky was the starting point, because that's what I tell all my students, the sky is the starting point. What would you be doing, and how do you feel like everything would be playing out right now?
Wait, am I going to say that?
It's okay if you don't want to. You don't have to say it out loud. The reaction was enough.
First things first, I'd pay off all those student loans. So that's the first thing. And then secondly, as someone who is very passionate about not only just the arts, but as a woman of faith, I very much am an advocate for ministry through the performing arts. And I don't think the Christian community has really tapped into the power of what that holds yet. I think the Christian community has tapped into that for music. There's plenty of bustling music artists who are successful. They've tapped into it for television. There's lots of that. They've tapped into it for film even. But they've yet to really as robustly tap into it in terms of theater. So, I would love for there to be, I would fund a theater org of my creation that had resident theater artists who were salaried, that they were focusing on creating performing arts works that were biblically based, in the same way that exists secularly. So Dallas Theater Center, for example, has a host of resident actors who are salaried to just focus on their shows. They're not out hustling. They're not out struggling. They're not out thinking about anything other than the upcoming season. And I think the Christian community could use that. And so that's what I would be doing.